Chapter 1 Chapter 1 Paula. I met Paula when I was 20, sitting on our friend's couch, eating raw almonds with her knees to her chest. She introduced herself. I'm Paula. The sound of her voice radiated warmth, a kindness. It wasn't so much that her eyes lit up, but that they found you. I could feel her looking. We went to Reflections. It was the first time I had been to a gay bar, and would be my last for a long time. I was a miserable flirter, flirting when I didn't mean to, and not when I wanted to. We stood close, but not too close. The air was so thick, I was swimming in it. That summer, we took a friend's boat to an empty island to camp. We did mushrooms around fires and cooked salmon wrapped in tinfoil, stars pulsating, reaching as if forming sentences. Mushrooms always made me cry, but she loved them. Eventually, my anxious tears turned to joy. I envied the self-assurance in her body. We danced on the beach. A guitar was being strummed. We took turns playing shitty covers. I had just returned from a month-long trip in Eastern Europe, backpacking with my childhood best friend Mark. We began in Prague and took the train to Vienna, Budapest, Belgrade, and Bucharest. We stayed in hostels, except for one day in Bucharest when Mark was so ill that we got a hotel room with air conditioning. I bought individually wrapped cheese slices from the store and put them in the small freezer of the small hotel room's small fridge. We waited as they became cold, and I pressed damp cloths on the back of his neck and along his spine. When the cheese slices were frozen, I placed them all over Mark's body, and that seemed to help a bit. The room had a jacuzzi, and we sat in it without filling it up and flipped through the television channels, landing on a porno that incidentally also took place in a jacuzzi. Mark ate the cheese. This was before smartphones. Navigating trains, hostels, men with one guidebook. We would go to internet cafes to send a message home. Hey, we're alive. I would email Paula, yearning for her. I thought about her incessantly. While we railed through Austria, looking at sea of sunflowers, while I drank blueberry beer in a basement in Belgrade, lips purple, head spinning, like the last time we kissed, which was the first time, on a 12-hour train ride from Belgrade to Bucharest during one of the worst heat waves in decades. Mark and I lay next to each other on the same bunk, window down with our heads as close to the opening as we could manage. There was no air conditioning, and we had no water. We listened to Cat Power through shared earphones and sipped absinthe. Are you listening to it at the same time, the CD I made you? I wondered, almost saying the words out loud. I watched the night pass by, the Serbian landscape. Oh my God. Sorry, Brent. Oh, just blocked the whole camera. Okay, where was I? I watched the night pass by, the Serbian landscape, rural, motionless with its sparse, fleeting lights. I thought of Paula. That time of Reflections was new for me, being in a queer space and being present, enjoying it. Shame had been drilled into my bones since I was my tiniest self, and I struggled to rid my body of that old toxic and erosive mirror. But there was a joy in the room. It lifted me, forced a reaction in the jaw, an uncontrolled, steady smile. Dancing, sweat dripping down my back, down my chest, I watched Paula's hair twist and bounce as she moved effortlessly, chaotic but controlled, sensual and strong. I would catch her looking at me, or was it the other way around? We wanted to be caught, deer in the headlights, startled but not breaking. Can I kiss you? I asked, jolted by my boldness as if it came from somewhere else, powered by the electronic music perhaps, a circuit of release, of demanding you leave your repression at the door. And then I did, in a queer bar. In front of everyone around us, I was coming to understand what all of these poems were about, what all the fuss was. Everything was cold before, motionless, emotionless. Any woman I had loved hadn't loved me back, and the one who maybe had loved me the wrong way. But here I was, on a dance floor with a woman who wanted to kiss me, and the antagonizing, cruel voice that flooded my head whenever I felt desire was silent. Maybe for a second, I could allow myself pleasure. We leaned in so our lips brushed, the tips of our tongues barely touching, testing, sending shocks through my limbs. We stared at each other, a quiet knowing. Here I was on the precipice, getting closer to my desires, my dreams, me, without the unbearing weight of the self-disgust I'd carried for so long. But a lot can change in a few months, and in a few months, Juno would premiere. Chapter 2, Sensuality Sweepstakes. The Ellen Page Sensuality Sweepstakes. I read the headline, color draining from my face. It was an article by Michael Musto in the Village Voice during the peak of Juno's success. I skimmed the rest of the piece. Among his speculation about a 20-year-old's sexuality, Michael included, I mean, come on, already, is she, Lebanese? She certainly dresses like a, tomboy. Let's put the dykey pieces together. Is Juno a, I had been thrust into the spotlight overnight, but I'd already been called a dykes many times while growing up in Canada. The bullying had taken on a new tone in high school, from little quips by the popular girls to the relatively dramatic display of being physically forced into the boys' bathroom. Pushed in, nostrils distorted by that foreign urinal smell, I waited a moment, listening for their glee to dissipate, to soften with distance, only to exit and have the stern, narrow face of my English teacher glaring directly at me. To the office. I apologized. I didn't say I was pushed in. Not long before the bullying amped up, I had been rooming with a girl named Fiona in the St. Francis Xavier University dorm for a soccer tournament. St. FX is located in Antigonish, a town on the tip of northwest Nova Scotia. Just a skip and a jump from Cape Breton. It hosts the oldest ongoing Highland Games outside Scotland. Nova Scotia is Latin for New Scotland, but the land it's on originally named Mi'kmaq. The Mi'kmaq have lived here for over 10,000 years. I can still remember the sound of Fiona's laugh. I could hear it above any other noise, through all this static, penetrating my ears, swelling inside my body. I wanted to be near her. I wanted her to want me. I was a right-wing midfielder, speedy, small, but scrappy. She was a sweeper, the last line of our team's defense, and co-captain with our center midfielder. She was a natural leader, commanding but kind. She had our backs. I loved watching her kick the ball, strong, fluid, and with a confidence I envied. I was crushing. We lay in hard beds on either side of the room, the walls lined with dark cheap wood. I looked at the ceiling and inhaled deeply. Would I keep it in or let it out? The sensation was preternatural, as if I was spying on a potential future. I think I may be bisexual, I said, this seemingly out of nowhere, having never conveyed anything like this to anyone. No, you are not, she responded immediately, a sharp reflex, giggling after she said it. This time, the sound of her laughter was harsh and cutting. Still, I wanted to laugh with her. I mean, being queer is funny and bad, right? The word homosexuality, simply uttered in health class, would give way to a cacophony of snickering. All the sitcoms I watched when I went home from school reinforced this. Whenever a joke was made or I made one, it stuck. Shit in the treads of my shoes. A spotlight moving stage right to stage left. I would tap dance around it like a wet dog. I'd scramble to shake it off, to shake it out. I can't remember what was said after, just the echoing laughter and the hard surface of the stiff bed. Unable to sleep, I snuck out into the fluorescent hallway around 5 a.m. I sat on the floor to read. Ch.1-5 was the first writer I ever really liked, thumbing the nose at you-know-who. I was reading Mother Night, a novel of moral ambiguity. We are what we pretend to be. We are what we pretend to be. So we must be careful about what we pretend to be. Vonnegut wrote. Sitting in the hall alone, I chewed on these words. Shame. With its steady swing, oscillated through my body. Something had slipped through my fingers. There was no catching it. I waited for the sun to rise. We all ate breakfast together in the common area. There were Tim Hortons bagels and a large bag of oranges brought by a parent. The adults looked on, drinking their coffees. I ate silently. I didn't know how to look at Fiona and figured it was best to avoid the situation. I grabbed my shin pads, intending to get to the field early and warm up for the game. Dyke. The word smacked me across the face, said through that fiendish smirk I would come to know so well. As if gloating, ha, I'm nothing like you. It came from a popular friend of Fiona's, and it stung. An isolated pain, a blink of language, but really it's permanent. Things change after that. What? My dog. He didn't like that word either. Okay, but okay. An isolated pain, a blink of language, but really it's permanent. Things change after that. Something had been severed. It could sense the whispers, a shift in energy, the speculation. Perhaps it was good. That dangling tooth needed to be ripped out. A few months later, my father and I were visiting my grandmother in Lockport, Nova Scotia, a small fishing village with a population of just over 500, located on the south shore of the province. Fishing boats line the harbor, strung along the long pier, colors like Christmas lights. Worn yellow, a faded red, various shades of blue, a Nova Scotia postcard. When I was a kid, my father would take me to Lockport on July 1st, a holiday in my homeland called Canada Day. Think July 4th, but with less independence from the crown, more Canada's birthday. As a white kid growing up in Nova Scotia, I'd had no clue about our history or our present. I was not taught it. The degree of our genocidal roots, the systematic racism, the segregation. I thought Canada Day was all about fireworks, a parade, strawberry shortcake in the church basement, and my favorite event on July 1st, the grease pole. A long, thin log was laid down on the pier, protruding out over the harbor with a long drop to the water. Lard had been rubbed all over the hard wood, smothering it. On the far end, stretching out over the ocean, is a whack of cash held down by a chunk of lard that competitors attempt to retrieve. There are only two strategies, really. One, on the stomach, slow, a small slither forward, slow again. This typically fails. Instead, the key seemed to be gliding out with as much speed as possible, swiping off as much money as you could while beginning your descent toward the frigid Atlantic. Emerging, you collect the fallen bills through the shock of the cold. Seagulls circle above, diving for the floating fat. No, I've never tried it. My grandmother still lived in the house when my father grew up. A small 2-story, with 3 bedrooms and white siding. Behind it, forest, endless forest. Across the street was my grandfather's general store, Page's store. It is still there, though I'm not sure what it is called now. They added a gas pump. The bedrooms upstairs were connected by a closet space that tunneled from one room to the other. As a kid, I'd escape into it, waltzing into an imagined dimension, the door so small as if it was designed for me. I would pull the chain on the bare bulb, illuminating my assortment of treasures. It all felt very cinematic. I'd look through the boxes of bullets, inspecting them, eyes closed like a jeweler. Fascinated that something so minuscule could kill the bucks I would see jetting through the woods. Their stoic bodies barreling, seeming too magnificent to crumple over a tiny little thing. "Dennis, what are you going to do if Ellen's a dyke?" my grandmother asked my father as we all sat in her sunroom. Her voice that same sharp tone she used when saying racist things. In the Alanis Morissette version of irony, this was the same grandparent who had given me a bear with rainbows on its paws and ears when I was born. I was 16 now and recently shaved my head for a film. A Blue Jays game played. Baseball was her favorite sport, and Toronto was her beloved team. Or was it Boston? That was one of the last times I would see my grandmother before she passed. I wonder what she would think of her grandson now if she were still alive. I doubt she would choose rainbows anymore. Some people do change, though. The success of Juno coincided with people in the industry telling me that no one could know I was queer, that it would be good for me, that I should have options to trust that this was for the best. So I put on the dresses and the makeup. I did the photo shoots. I kept Paula hidden. I was struggling with depression and having panic attacks so bad that I would collapse. I could barely function, numb and quiet, nails in my stomach. I was incapable of articulating the depth of pain I was in, especially because my dreams were coming true. Or at least this is what I was being told. I dismissed my feelings as dramatic, berated myself for being ungrateful. I felt too guilty to say I was hurting, incapacitated, and I didn't see a future. I called my manager after reading the piece by Michael Musto, only to be met with a follow-up blog post detailing their phone conversation. "It's not mean to wonder if someone's gay," I shrieked, outraged. "Sure, it is not mean to simply wonder if someone's gay. What was thoughtless and dangerous was writing something without any concern for a young queer person's journey." Juno had premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival to a fervent response. I did not have a personal publicist at the time. I decided I could go it alone. After a previous experience where an innocent teenage question, "Did you ever watch Xena?" was met with, "No, because I'm not a lesbian." I was glad to not be working with a publicist anymore. These comments, emblematic of the Hollywood they warned you about. Plastic, empty, homophobic. Still, I wasn't prepared or experienced enough to navigate this new fame alone. It is different growing up as an actor in Canada, especially when I did. Canada didn't have the glossy cover. We weren't so obsessed with being shiny. The insistence to mask up, mostly came with Juno. I was planning on wearing jeans and a westernist shirt to Juno's world premiere. I thought it was a cool look, and it had a collar. That's fancy, right? I thought. When the Fox Searchlight publicity team learned about my outfit, they urgently took me to Holt Renfrew on Bloor Street with a dramatic rushing that is characteristic of the Hollywood circulatory system. I suggested a suit. They said I should wear a dress and heels. After they discussed this with the director, he called me. He said he agreed with them, insisting that I play the part. Michael Cera rocked sneakers, slacks, and a collared shirt. He looked fancy to me. I wonder why they didn't take him to Holt Renfrew. I guess he had nothing to hide. He was approved. He fit the part. Being made to feel that I was inadequate, anonymous, the little queer who needed to be tucked away, while being celebrated for repudiating myself was a slippery slope that I'd been sliding down since before I could remember. And like a film stuck to my skin, I couldn't wash it off. The compulsion to tear apart my flesh, a sort of scolding. I became as repulsed as them. I was spending more and more time in Los Angeles. Press for Juno meetings, award seasons, which is actually 2 seasons. Back in Nova Scotia, another publication investigated my sexuality, perhaps trying to win Michael Musto's sexuality sweepstakes. Frank, a magazine that has been published out of Halifax since 1987, considered itself a satirical magazine, but was actually more like a tabloid. I was in Santa Monica when my father called to tell me that I was on the cover. A photo of me from Sundance with a giant headline that read, "Is Ellen Page gay?" I spun out. In bed at a friend's guest house, I closed my wet eyes tight, tears soaking my cheeks. Please, let this be a dream. Please. When I got back to Halifax, the magazine was everywhere, always sitting in view at the grocery store, the gas station, the corner store, and there they all were asking the question, "Is Ellen Page gay?" Paula would flip them around, hide them behind other magazines. Once she stole a bunch from a gas station in the South End. The freedom I felt during my summer with Paula was coming to an end. There was a photograph inside that included Paula, a small group of us at a party. I remember that night, gathering at an apartment in one of the drab condo buildings that continued to overtake Halifax. The article speculated whether we were in a relationship or not, examining the rumors. Paula was still not out to her family. Staring at that picture, a realization. A friend must have sent this to them. I never knew who. Chapter 3. Boy. We matched online, my first time on a dating app. My first time dating as an out trans person. After eating dinner in the meatpacking district, I hopped on the train to Midtown to meet up with Sarah and her friends. I was nervous but energized. These spontaneous adventures new to me. The bar was tacky, but I liked it. Searching for her, my eyes landed on a group of women. They sat at a high table with stools, already a few drinks in. I hate tall stools. They didn't work well with my short legs. The woman greeted me kindly, welcoming me, pulling up another seat. All of them were gorgeous, hovering around 6 feet. I was dubious about my match with Sarah. Were they just tipsy, swinging through the app, bemused by my presence on it, the little trans guy? Did they flip through all the cis dudes, the hot record producers, pro athletes, doctors, and then pause on my photo? A moment of disgust, or merriment, or both. I ordered a tequila soda on the rocks with lime. TVs played. Remnants of food were scattered on the table. I downed my drink and ordered another. Nova Scotia, I said, responding to the obligatory, "Where are you from?" "It's in Canada," I added. "What?" I thought it was in Scandinavia or something, one of her pals responded. I finished my second drink and popped out to smoke a joint. Sarah followed. "When did you know?" she asked as we stood outside, leaning against a wall. She loomed over me. For a brief moment, I wondered what she meant. This is something I'm asked frequently, and not something I wish for during a casual night out. I experienced this inquiry as a queer woman, but as a trans guy, it's perpetual. Code for, "I don't believe you." I knew when I was 4 years old, I went to the YMCA preschool in downtown Halifax, on South Park Street across from the public gardens. The building had a dark brick facade and has since been demolished and replaced. Primarily, I understood that I wasn't a girl. not in a conscious sense, but in a pure sense, uncontaminated. That sensation is one of my earliest and clearest memories. The bathroom was down the hall from my preschool class. I would try to pee standing up, assuming this to be the better fit for me. I would press on my vagina, holding it, pinching it and squeezing it, hoping I could aim. I defiled the stall, but the bathroom often smelled of urine anyway. I was perplexed by my experience. Severed from the other girls, twists in my stomach when I gazed at them. I remember one in particular, Jane. Her long brown hair, the way she could draw, her eyes focused and still with concentration. I was jealous of her artistic abilities. When I drew a person, limbs would protrude out of the head, arms like branches, thin lines for fingers, little chicken legs with oversized sneakers. Jane, however, would draw a body, a stomach, a belly button. I was transfixed. My first crush, but I knew I was not like her. Can I be a boy? I asked my mother at 6 years old. We lived on 2nd Street at the time. Having moved only a few minutes, walk from our previous attic apartment on Churchill Drive. A ground level flat on a tree-lined street. It had 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and a lovely small living area with big windows. I'd sit in front of the TV for hours playing Sega Genesis, Aladdin, NHL 94, Sonic the Hedgehog, praying to God when my back was against the ropes, requiring the all-magnificent force to help me beat the game. There are no atheists in foxholes. No, honey, you can't. You're a girl, my mom responded. She paused, not moving her eyes from the dish towels she was methodically folding before saying, but you can do anything a boy can do. One by one, stacking them neatly in their place. It reminded me of how she looked when ordering a Happy Meal for me at McDonald's. I insisted on the boy's toy every time, a delightful, congenial bribe. My mother's discomfort requesting the toy was palpable, releasing a sort of shy giggle, slivers of shame peering through. Often they gave the girls one anyway. At 10, people started addressing me as a boy. Having won a year-long battle to cut my hair short, I started to get a thanks, bud, when holding the door for someone at the Halifax shopping center. It was unfathomable to me that I wasn't a boy. I writhed in clothes that were even in the slightest bit feminine. Everyone around me saw a different person than I saw. So much of my childhood I preferred to be alone. I played by myself extensively. Private play, I called it. Mom, I'm going to have private play now, I'd say as I marched up the stairs to my room, closing the door behind me. I loved action figures, Batman and Robin, Hook and Peter Pan, Luke Skywalker, 2 Barbies from Happy Meals, whose hair I cut off, the girl toy, making it into the back despite the boy toy request. I was a walking stereotype, just not in the way my mom wanted. Disappearing into private play for hours, I built forts on my bunk bed. It was metal, bars lining the bottom of the top bunk, and I would hang blankets and towels, making rooms. A little kitchen, a miniature bedroom, vanishing into intricate and impassioned narratives. Danger lurked. I'd hanged off the top bunk, as if dangling from a cliff, facing death, using all my might to pull myself up to safety. Imagine romance's bloom. I would write love letters to my fake girlfriend from across the lava floor, always signing, Love, Jason. I would tell her about all my adventures abroad, how I longed for her, cared for her, that I needed her in my arms. Those were some of the best times of my life, traveling to another dimension where I was me. And not just a boy, but a man who could fall in love and be loved back. Why did we lose that ability to create a whole world? A bunk bed was a kingdom. I was a boy. My imagination was a lifeline. It was where I felt the most unrestrained, unself-conscious, real. Not a visualization, far more natural. Not a wishing, but an understanding. When I was present with myself, I knew without exception. I saw with startling clarity then. I missed that. Private play was similar to acting, the sensation a sort of paradox. My reliance on my imagination has carried me through life. Perhaps I've been chasing that feeling ever since. Acting, finding a character, it is like being possessed, Samantha Morden once said. Later, when I was 16, her performance in Lynn Ramsey's Malvern Caller would become one of my greatest inspirations. The quietness, the subtlety, the power of silence. Before my taste in cinema led me to films like Ratcatcher and Malvern Caller, I was stuck on disaster films. I rented Anaconda on my 11th birthday, not a disaster film, but close. Anna, a girl in my class, had come over for a sleepover. We took a cold, short walk from home, cutting across the boulevard to Isleville Street. The grass, hard and frozen, crunching under our feet. The video store was in a small brick building. We moved through the aisles, assessing the covers. After the demise of VHS tapes and DVDs, it became a salon. After the salon, I'm not sure. The building isn't there anymore. We trudged back home, clutching our prize, eagerly waiting for J-Lo, Ice Cube, and Owen Wilson to face off with the world's largest and deadliest snake. They strike, wrap around you, hold you tighter than your true love, and you get the privilege of hearing your bones break before the power of embrace because you're caused... They strike you, wrap around you, hold you tighter than your true love, and you get the privilege of hearing your bones break before the power of embrace causes your veins to explode. All the boys liked Anna, including me. Friends since primary, we went to school together and played on the same soccer team, the Halifax City Celtics. She was defense, right wing typically. We'd play Aladdin for hours on Sega Genesis. We'd jump on her bed singing to Aqua in unison. I'm a Barbie girl in the Barbie world. Life is plastic, it's fantastic. You can brush my hair, undress me everywhere. Imagination, life is your creation. I often dreamed of being Aladdin, but it wasn't for the rug or the wishes or the teeny monkey, but to know what it feels like to delicately touch a girl. A sparkle of romance. I remember sitting on a wall with Anna after school, waiting for my mother to pick me up. We sat with our legs dangling, looking down the quiet, leafy street. I slid my body closer to hers, barely touching, feeling the concrete scrape against me. I went to place my hand on her thigh. What are you doing? Her body recoiled as if grazed with a soldering iron. She didn't move after that, or speak. Neither did I. Then her mom came and picked her up. Anna and I grew apart. She became very popular, and I, as you can imagine, did not. Still, it wasn't long before I started exploring sexually, but invariably with boys. My first kiss happened with a boy named Justin. He looked like a character from The Lord of the Rings, Kate Blanchett's elf son or something. He built a fort around his bed, and like little spellunkers, we would crawl inside and make out to Kenny G. His family dog was small and white and the absolute worst. So mean. I would secretly feed the dog under the table, pinning my hopes on a soggy French fry, beseeching it to love, or at least tolerate, me. We'd exchange notes at school, a new feeling, a flutter in my lower back. How did a little piece of paper with a few sentences alter me this way? Risky and exhilarating, it added a poetry to the days, transcending the mundane. Maybe not exactly right, but a path I couldn't stop walking down. A teacher intercepted one note. Meet me in the corner of the backfield and I'll give you another massage. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, frozen, but Justin, being a goddamn genius, said that he meant to write message, but spelled it incorrectly. The teacher bought it. I was with Justin for the first time. I was called a faggot. We were huddled in the trees of Fort Needleham Memorial Park. The location burned in my memory. Fort Needleham was established during the American Revolutionary War. It looked out over what is now Halifax's North End, where I grew up. Now, a bell tower stands atop the hill, built in the remembrance of the Halifax explosion. A major disaster forgotten by most of the world, but that quite literally shaped the entire landscape of my childhood, with evidence everywhere I turned. The Halifax explosion on December 6, 1917, involved a Norwegian relief ship, the IMO, and a French munition ship, the Mont Blanc, which contained 250 tons of TNT, 62 tons of gun cotton, 246 tons of benzol, and 2,366 tons of picric acid. The cargo weighed 6 million pounds, 19 times the weight of the Statue of Liberty. As detailed in John U. Bacon's book, The Great Halifax Explosion, ships in Halifax Harbor transporting ammunition to Europe typically flew a red flag to signify the contents, but due to the threat of German U-boats outside the harbor on its arrival, the Mont Blanc did not. Only 5 people in the city knew what was on that ship. As the Mont Blanc discreetly made its way into Halifax Harbor at dawn, the IMO was gearing up for its voyage. The IMO had been delayed a day, waiting for a late coal shipment, and its captain now ventured out, irate from the lost time. He sped along the incorrect side as he approached the narrowest part of the harbor. A game of chicken commenced. One captain made the last-minute decision to turn, so did the other, and they collided. People rushed toward the harbor, and their windows as giant smoke clouds arose. Unaware of the Mont Blanc's contents, the ship burned for nearly 20 minutes and then detonated, leveling the entirety of the north end. More than 2.5 square kilometers destroyed. Over 1,500 people died instantly, left limbless, clothes ripped from their bodies, vaporized. The force of the explosion caused a 35-foot tsunami, sucking out bodies that will never be found. The blast was so extreme, it was studied during the Manhattan Project to create the atomic bomb, a fact kept secret for decades. Survivors screamed for help under the enormity of the destruction. Injured and dying, it was the morning and the wood stoves had been burning and the rubble ignited. The fire engulfed the ruins. People screamed for help, flames fast approaching. Survivors had said that their worst tormenting memory is the sound of agony, the guttural screams coming from those trapped underneath. People were forced to flee, fire spreading. Parents leaving children, a lover leaving their soulmate. At least 2,000 people died and over 9,000 were injured in what was the largest man-made explosion prior to the atomic bomb. And that is where I sat kissing decades later. Together at the base of the conifers, an empty liquor bottle by our side, perhaps left by 2 other lovers, touching, kissing, holding each other. We were 2 boys, and we looked like 2 boys. What are you? Fucking faggots? A group of teenagers were coming at us. Faggots, faggots, faggots. They were bigger, menacing, cruel. Faggots, we're gonna beat you up. I'm a girl, I told them. Boy, get out of the way. Go sit down. Oh god. He didn't like that word either. Lay down, buddy. I'm a girl, I told them. Oh, then what are you, an alien? They spat at Justin. Something clicked and we started to run. This wasn't going to be just words. Our legs flailing as we sprinted down the hill, electricity in the gut. Every step, a Hail Mary pass. I fled toward my babysitter's house, thinking it was a wiser choice than my own. There was no time to look over my shoulder. The voices kept coming. Miraculously, we made it to her porch. I could hear her, Lhasa Apso, Bubba, barking. The boys came to a stop. She came to the door, our panic clear. She looked to the group of boys, understanding coming to her eyes. Fuck off, you little shits. I can still see it. her yelling at them, it was rare to feel protected. Growing up, I was taught the Mont Blanc explosion was an accident, a mistake. 2 ships collided and one had explosives, and that was that. It wasn't an accident, though. It was a coincidence of war. Consequence of war. It was a consequence of war. The explosion created thousands of orphans overnight. People were unhoused and hungry. St. Paul's Church served over 10,000 meals that month. My mother's father, who died when she was 16, was the minister there for years. St. Paul's evidently survived the blast, but the windows were shattered, along with all of the windows in all of Halifax. As many stood with their faces closed, looking out at the rising smoke, I imagined the carnage, the snow blood red, and apocalyptic slaughter. Where did all of that trauma go? Children suddenly with no parents, walking in the midst of unspeakable devastation. What did queer people do after the tragedy? Those who lost secret lovers, the closeted grief. Chapter 4, Action Figures. My mom and I moved to the Hydrostone neighborhood in 1994 when I was about to turn 8. It was developed after the blast that flattened the north end. The fire that had engulfed the rubble prompted the idea of hydrostones for the reconstruction, the only neighborhood like it in all of North America. Large, non-flammable slabs of concrete with crushed granite were used to build the row houses that make up the 10 blocks long, 1 block wide neighborhood. A neighborhood shaped by devastation. I loved growing up there. All the streets except for one had large boulevards where kids would play and adults would lay out picnics. Back alleys snaked between the blocks. Laundry waved its colors. Chimes hung on small back patios as cats lurked. I liked to roam the alleys by myself, a boy in his adventures. When my mother bought her house, a 2-bedroom with 1 bathroom, the neighborhood was still accessible for someone with her income. Divorced, a single mom, and a teacher. She would pick me up from the after-school program in the early evening, asking me about my day, what I'd learned, what homework I had. I liked hearing about her stories too, what happened in her classroom. One time she told me about a boy who stood on his desk and peed in defiance. Arriving home, I protest starting my homework as my mom ran a bath for me or started preparing dinner. She never did get a proper rest. At bath time, I'd line up all of my various companions along the side of the tub and plead for my mother to be a judge for their diving competition. My arm in the air, holding Batman by the feet, I'd release him, and Bruce Wayne would enter the water, hopefully producing only a subtle splash to impress the judge. A 7, my mom would say after my action figure had plunged into the depths. An 8, after Peter Pan successfully slipped into the water. Yay! I'd cheer, always secretly hoping Peter would win. Okay, hon, I've got to put supper on. 1 more, please, Mom. Please. Okay, 1 more. And I dropped another. When a winner was decided, I'd stand the figure proudly on the side of the tub as my mom hummed the Olympics theme. Sometimes she would even light a match and hold it up like a torch. The bath was also where I played out my rescue fantasies. I loved Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and was positively enamored with the daughter, Amy Slilinski. I couldn't take my eyes off of her beauty, a sweetness in her voice. I loved how she cared for her younger brother. In the bathtub, I was Rush Jr., the smoldering boy next door, rescuing Amy from drowning in the backyard, turned oversized jungle. Me as Rush Jr., panicked, but managing to maintain composure. Head under the water, I'd search, backflip, flip around, under again, not giving up until I had rescued the one I loved. Eventually getting her to safety, I would perform mouth to mouth on my hand, desperate for her to wake up. And only when she did could I let go. I did it, I think, as I'd imagined myself flashing Russ Jr.'s signature half smile, that look I saw in his eyes. My mom loved being a public school teacher, and she was an incredible one. She taught French for 25 years and English for 8, and I can't tell you the number of people who have said to me, Madam Pillpots was the best teacher I ever had. Early on, I would help my mom set up her classroom at the end of summer, sticky tack on posters, the months laid out, cuts of the sun, clouds, snow. It's in French. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but it says Janvier, February, Mars, Avril. I love trips to the laminator, the smell of it, the way it wraps something up, keeping it safe. The empty halls of the school were eerie, uncanny. Wandering through them had an unearthly quality, as if floating. What was it like to spend your whole day in the room stuffed with 30 elementary school students, and then have to come home, make dinner, and judge your kid's fake diving competition? She'd been on her feet all day and now was crouched on the cold tile floor. I'm sure desperate for a comfy seat, warm food and cold beer, none of which were going to magically appear before her. These are important moments to remember. They aren't small. On Saturdays, my mom would gather snacks and beverages, and we'd settle together in the large beige chair that worked as a love seat. Turning on the television to CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. We'd prepare ourselves for hockey night in Canada, a Pepsi in my hand and an Alexander Keith's from my mom. We cheered and hollered with a large bag of ketchup chips, wedged in between. The Toronto Maple Leafs was our favorite team. My mother let me exist as me in many ways when I was young. When it was just us, it was on picture days, the rare church visit, weddings, recitals, Christmas parties, other special occasions when it wasn't just the two of us that I had to wear a dress. A barrette in my hair with a baby blue butterfly. I wanted to tear it out. Taking my hair with it, I'd throw a fit, feeling of betrayal spreading through me as my mom tried to dress me. The sensation of tights squeezing my legs exacerbated all the discomforts that I couldn't yet put words to. I didn't grow out of this phase where I was supposed to, and my mom's distaste for that, for what I wore and whom I befriended grew. Masculine clothes and boys as friends should have been over, that whole tomboy thing, a label that never felt quite right to me, but it was what everyone called me, so eventually it was what I called myself, a hazy memory. I should be turning into a young lady, my mother's idea of one at least. I just want what is best for you. I want to protect you. I don't want you to have a hard life. These sentiments would slide over me. What was best meant fitting neatly into our society's expectations. Staying inside the lines, the perfect heroine's journey, preemptively and unknowingly written for me. How would her family, friends, soccer parents, fellow teachers, and neighbors feel? Had she done something wrong? What if it was a sin, and whether it was conscious or not? If I had to conform, why shouldn't you have to? I wonder about the magnitude of what my mom was unable to do and explore, how these confines affected her amid all of untangling that's led to me to me. No matter the difficulties or moments of distance, I've never doubted my mother's love for me. How lucky I am for that. When I was little, my mom would take me out to Peggy's Cove, over a 45-minute drive from Halifax. Climbing on the rocks, I'd pretend I was off in a distant land, searching for treasure and mystical beings. I would examine the tide pools, looking for the life inside. My mom and I would talk on fake walkie-talkies, our fists held to our face. Click, over, making sure to avoid the dark, wet boulders. We'd explore for ages, spotting little creatures scurrying under the rocks. When the waves were large, it was positively thrilling. They'd smash against the shore with magnificent force, rising high and reaching towards the famous lighthouse. Moments turned to postcards. We'd end up at the parking lot outside of the restaurant that sits overlooking the cove. Seagulls circled above, waiting to pounce on scraps next to tourist buses. My mom loved the gingerbread there, so sometimes I got to have a treat. Peggy's Cove afternoons with my mom are some of the best childhood memories. The ruggedness, that intense, unforgiving beauty, how present my mother and I were in each other's company. Our limbs stretching and reaching, feet searching for a spot to land. The salty, brisk chill of the Atlantic. I love you, over, click. I love you too, over, click. It is so sad that all the static had to get in the way as I aged. A dark rock on which to slip, suddenly appearing and taking us both down. That pure connection that went beyond appearance and expectations, both of us free in the moment. These are the memories I revisit. In the winter, I looked forward to snow days, the suspense sitting on the edge of my mom's bed next to the radio, wishing desperately, dreaming of snow forts and snowmen. I would close my eyes, listening to the CBC radio host recite a list of school cancellations to the soothing voice. Snow day mornings were absolute heaven. My mom and I had a ritual. I would sit in a purple plastic shed and she would pull me through the snow. The destination? Tim Hortons. Marching along, crunch, crunch, her boots sinking. Everything covered in white, icicles like spears. I'll have a medium with a double cream and just a pinch of sugar. Not very much, thanks. I would mouth my mom's order at Tim's in the morning on the way to school, while she leaned her head out the car window, neck reaching for the drive-through speaker. For me, I liked the hot chocolate. The sound of the little sled brushing the snow underneath, the steady glide through the barren landscape, offered tranquility, a sense of togetherness. Shut your eyes and you're flying through the universe. Chapter 5, Rough Housing. When the Mont Blanc detonated, a gas fireball of oil, cargo, ship parts, and humans catapulted 2 miles into the sky. Topping 1,000 pounds, a piece of the Mont Blanc's anchor was found nearly 2.5 miles away. The anchor site is on the cusp of the Regatta Point walkway at the corner of Anchor Drive and Spinnaker Drive, a 2-minute walk from where I grew up with my father. I was under 2 when my parents divorced. They had been together for 10 years, married for about 8 of those, and when my father moved first out into an apartment into downtown Halifax, where he lived until he moved to Spinnaker Drive when I was 6. Mostly with my mother. After the separation, I visited my father every other week or so. A thrilling vacation, the apartment building, directly across the street from the Halifax Harbor, had a pool. A pool! You technically were not allowed to jump or dive, but we would in secret. One of us on the lookout for Cranky Cram, as my dad referred to the building supervisor. The view of what the Micmac named Jipuktuk, or Great Harbor, is now blocked by condos. But at 5 years old, I could look out and study the boats and ships, my tiny brain struggling to deduce how objects that massive were smoothly gliding along the surface, how the masses of steel weren't just swallowed up. I'd watch them slowly make their way toward the Atlantic, floating beyond George's Island. Named after a British king and smack dab in the middle of the harbor, it was occupied by the British military in 1750. The island's fort became one of the most important naval bases for the British Empire in the 18th and 19th centuries. The intricate underground tunnel system sounded like something out of the Goonies. People spoke of ghosts, apparitions loitering, a result of executions, deaths in the prison camp and in the quarantine station on the island. Going to sleep, I selfishly prayed the ghost couldn't swim. My dad had recently started a graphic design business with a friend, Eric Wood. The Page and Wood office was inside the brewery market, a sprawling heritage building constructed in the 1800s out of granite and ironstone, just a short walk from the apartments down Lower Water Street. It was mostly known for the farmers' market every Saturday. In existence since 1983, the farmers' market is where I've spent countless Saturday mornings weaving through the crowds, collecting produce, eating fresh cinnamon buns, listening to the fiddle echo through the main hall. At the beginning, the office was quite small. My dad had a large, slanted white desk where he would brainstorm and sketch. At one point, he got one of those golf putting practice machines that shoots the ball back to you. Putting next to his desk, I'd make up stories. Me, a cool professional golfer in one of those crisp collared shirts. 18th hole, a putt for eagle to win. I liked how men held the club with their hands, the way they adjusted their fingers, wiggled their feet, how they craned their whole necks to face the hole and looked back to the ball focused. Then, a steadily slight swing. I was flexible with the mulligans. My dad, Dennis, was spending time with a woman named Linda, who would eventually become my stepmother. Linda and Dennis met when they worked in the same office. I think of my mother now, her husband leaving her for someone else. She was alone, taking care of the child and working full-time as a teacher. Then, I'd return all giddy and insensitive with stories about swimming, blabbering away about the new lady and her waterbed. No grass of the hurt, the resentment. How that must have pierced her heart. It takes two, my mother says. I had a role too. I've always found it strange when my mother and father had a baby, me. Their relationship was already in trouble by the time I came along. I suppose gratitude is the course of action, but if I was not born, I'd have no perception of what I'd be missing, nor would anyone else miss me. This would suit me just fine. We're all micro specks, almost nothing in the grand scheme. Linda lived in Clinton Park, an area in Halifax, approximately a 15-minute drive from my father's. She had a condo and an apartment complex, 2 stories, the kitchen, dining area, and living room on one floor, and the pair of bedrooms and bathroom upstairs. Linda had children from her previous marriage, Scott and Ashley. Scott was 3.5 years older than me, Ashley another 3 years older than him. Their father was a teacher, like my mom. Scott and Ashley's room was rad. A wooden white bunk bed, Scott on the top, Ashley on the bottom. When I slept over, a small futon was rolled out on the floor. I was jealous of the top bunk, but my time would come. They had a TV in their room with a Nintendo, the original one that had launched in 1985. Scott and I would play Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt for hours, staining the controllers with our ketchup-laced fingers. Linda's room contained that aforementioned waterbed, still the only one I have ever witnessed in the flesh. My father and I would visit. Linda would make supper. Typically, I was off with Scott. My stepmom's thing, shall we say, is cooking. She worked as a food stylist part-time, crimping and prodding produce and meat, preparing the perfect turkey for a TV commercial or photo shoot. For one job, she had to make an exorbitant amount of ice cream, but it had to be fake so it would not melt. The breakfast table, island, and dining table were covered with a multitude of experiments and concoctions. What a cruel joke. Fake ice cream. The 1996 movie, 2 If by Sea, starring Sandra Bullock and Dennis Leary, was set in New England, but filmed in the towns Chester and Lunenburg, along the south shore of Nova Scotia. Linda styled a decadent dinner for a scene. Her work appearing in Hollywood film had me buzzing, my heart aflutter for Sandra Bullock, my 8-year-old self not comprehending that I once again had a crush. 2 years later, I would have dinner with my friend Catherine Keener and Sandra at the famous Craig's in Beverly Hills. Did I say 2 or 20 years later? 20 years later, I would have dinner with my friend Catherine Keener and Sandra at the famous Craig's in Beverly Hills. Sandra looked so cool in jeans and a hip rocker tee. She was nice, funny, and grounded, just as my 8-year-old self had imagined. Oh, these strange roads we travel. Despite her supposed knack for cooking, I could not handle Linda's meals, incapable of digesting them. My father, stepbrother, and stepsister seemed to have no problem, enthusiastically moaning and complimenting. It felt as fake as her ice cream. I hated food that wasn't simple. My mom's free time was minimal. She didn't have space in the day to put together lavish meals with new tastes and smells. She was then teaching French at 2 or 3 schools on the outskirts of the city. Harrietsfield Elementary, William King Elementary, and Sambro Elementary. My favorite one. A small school. It is not far from Sambro Island's looming lighthouse, which is supposedly haunted. Legend has it that a Scot named Alexander, often referred to as the Double Alexander, was stationed there, and when he left the island to buy supplies, he not only didn't retrieve the goods, but also began a two-week drinking binge, and then took his own life. People say Double Alex's ghost can be heard walking, screwing with the lights and flushing toilets. I wanted what my mother made: meat and potatoes, noodles with butter, and steamed veggies. Linda's stir fries hit my gag reflex, and sweetness I wasn't used to. Drinking copious amounts of milk, I'd be reprimanded for not eating. I'd chew and chew and chew and chew, as if I'd lost my ability to swallow, the muscle memory abruptly vanishing. As a toddler, I'd be left alone at the table when the others were done with the timer counting down. Tick, 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 tick. I had to eat it all before the screeching bell. This elongated chomping persisted as I aged. Even her homemade pizza, a revelation that it wasn't just about flavor and aroma. When I was 6, we all moved in together. Dennis, Linda, Scott, and Ashley, and I stood in the concrete foundation of the new development on Spinnaker Drive, surrounded by high, foreboding gray walls. Looking up, just sky, the treetops, lining what would become the rear of the house, a small forest tucked up the hill from the back patio. The tall, thin townhouse had 4 floors, a den and half bath and basement, living room, kitchen, and dining area on the 2nd floor. On the 3rd, my bedroom, squeezed next to Scott's, a bathroom in the middle of the hall with Dennis and Linda at the front of the house. Their windows looking out to what the Micmac named Wigwawteach, meaning salt water all the way up, a narrow section of Halifax Harbor. It outlines the west side of the Halifax Peninsula, or as it renamed, the Northwest Arm. My stepsister Ashley, being the oldest, got the coolest room, the one on the top floor, a small attic space with a low, slanted ceiling. It would become my room when I returned from Toronto in my late teens, after grade 11, to take an entire year off acting so that I could complete my final year of school in Halifax. Directly across the street is Melville Cove, a small body of water that jets off the arm and separates Regatta Point Walkway from the Armdale Yacht Club, which incidentally is also on an island with a centuries-old, supposedly haunted brick and iron prison where hundreds of people died, predominantly prisoners of war. Adjacent to the prison, on the sliver of a peninsula, Dead Man's Island, there are almost 200 unmarked graves of Americans who died in captivity during the War of 1812. A plaque reads, "Go view the graves, which prisoners fill. Go count them on the rising hill. No monumental marble shows, whose silent dust does there repose." I was obsessed with my new room. I was the first to leave a mark, a tiny stain on the wall waiting to be washed off. The color was my choice, and thankfully, I was at an age where I could say what I actually wanted. Versus putting on the dress for my birthday, but not quite knowing why, like it was Halloween or something. I chose a dark blue, chose close to the deep shade of my stepbrothers. I tackled posters of Patrick Roy, Michael Jordan, and Joey McIntyre from New Kids on the Block on the wall. The bunk bed from Linda's old place, mine now. With both options available to me, I would switch, sometimes top, sometimes bottom. When Dennis and Linda moved in together, my time was split between households. 2 weeks with my father, the 1st to the 16th of every month, and 2 weeks with my mother from the 16th to the 1st. Scott and Ashley did the same with their dad. At my dad's, my stepbrother and I played street hockey, or floor hockey, virtually every day after school, a game we invented in the small upstairs hallway, where doors were goals, our hands were the hockey sticks, the perfect snap of the wrist torpedoing the ball, jutting out a shin to make a sweet save. I was into having an older brother. Scott was a jock, an excellent athlete who went on to play junior A hockey for years. A lot of my youth was spent in hockey rinks. I'd eat french fries and watch the brawls, transfixed by the bizarre sanctioned fighting. When his friends came over, I stayed close, that annoying kid brother who tags along. I loved how they dressed, how they smelled, the way they removed their t-shirts, reaching back over their shoulders, grabbing the fabric and pulling it up over their heads, revealing a torso, a dangling chain. I'd slink into Scott's room and dig out his cologne, not understanding the difference between a dab and a dollop. Is this a magic potion? I wondered. Perhaps this would do it. I snuck back out of his bedroom, the stench of a horny teenager trailing, as if I had plunged into an ocean of Old Spice. Scott was very physical with me, as a lot of older brothers are. We both were obsessed with wrestling, formerly known as WWF, World Wrestling Federation. Power slams and clotheslines took up an abundance of our television time. We'd wrestle, he would try moves on me, mostly with my consent. He performed power bombs, which were relatively safe and fun. He thrust me up into the air, flipping me, and I would land hard on my back, slamming into Dennis and Linda's bed. Once, however, there was no soft landing. He did it on the floor between the bed and the dresser. I didn't rotate the necessary degrees and landed head first, the top of my skull smashing into the floor, my neck wrenching. I lay on the floor stiff. I could not move, I could not talk, I could barely breathe. Staring at the ceiling, Scott panicked above me. He hushed and whispering. Petrified he'd get in trouble, he got me to my room, and I waited until the pain lessened. Like any sibling, he could get too rough, whether wrenching my arm until I screamed or putting me in a sleeper hold, making me slip under for a moment, blurred stars dancing in front of a black drop, or hurting me emotionally, throwing my stuffed animals around the room, punching them, beating them, my pleas only hyping him up more. Whether emotional or physical, when it was all too much, I would cry, begging him to stop, to leave. As a kid, it was complicated, looking up to him as much as I did, while also experiencing another side which felt harsh and remorseless. But none of this was Scott's fault. He was a kid too. Kids can be mean, kids can be rough. It was his mother's encouragement that stung. You're such a brat. Shut up, you brat, Linda shouted at me from the hall. She looked satisfied, as if having unearthed another perfectly discreet way to induce pain, shrouded in the guise of sibling tension. Linda's snicker came out when Scott and she would tease me, something evolving into a full cackle. It seemed she digged to find anything to pick at, whatever helped her feel better. In retrospect, I think it was compulsive. I'm sure Linda didn't want to be cruel, but I believe she held an impulse in her depths to habitually come for me. Private play in the bedroom offered solace. A different bunk bed challenged my architectural capabilities. Sometimes I'd include the desk adjacent to the bed, a tiny nook where one could hide. I adored Playmobil. I craved narrative, drama, relationships, and otherworldly challenges. At my mom's, I had a pirate ship, and at my father's, a Playmobil gas station. I escaped to my room, eager to go on a journey, an adventure of the imagination, which I found no less thrilling than a real adventure, if not more so. I had put on my blue Adidas tracksuit, a prized possession. It was zipped up to the very top that day, ready to go to a space where I could be exactly who I was. Nothing between me and the moment, no expectations, no performing, no eviscerating self-doubt. I slipped my arms into the loops of my backpack, which I'd stuffed full of the objects I might require on my adventure. A small wallet with a couple loonies and Canadian Tire money, a plastic sword. I knelt on the bed and making final adjustments to my pack, lost in my imaginary world. I was mentally preparing for my expedition when the door opened and in walked Linda. She burst into laughter and called for Scott to come see. I heard him scramble out of his room, and he appeared in the doorway next to her. They stood there, looming, just staring in and mocking me, speaking of me as if I was not there. What looked like delight spread across their faces as they teased me. The three of us, alone in the house, though I'm not sure that my father would have done much if he'd been there. He was different when it was just the two of us versus when it was the whole family. If Linda and you were drowning, I would save you, he would say in private. Linda's not the love of my life, you're the love of my life. This was a secret. I knew it was one without him directly saying so, because around Linda the energy was not the same. We had a song, Ruth Brown's Ain't Nobody's Business. Dennis would blare it, singing along while driving me to school. Around Linda, that love evaporated. A transformation in the tone, the body, the face. A coldness, as if they conspired and teamed up. A frigid demeanor that made my eyes fall to the floor. She could be mean to me around the others, but was worse to me when we were alone. I kept these stories close. It's hard to even share fragments of them here. My father did nothing, no protection. I yearned for time with my father, away from Linda. You're manipulating your father, she spat once. The words searing and sharp, they synced. A flash frying, leaving a mark. A flash fry, leaving a mark. Linda did not like us spending time alone together. Every time, without fail, it created friction. They married when I was 10 in our living room, in front of the fireplace. I wore a little dress and I sobbed. Linda hugged me as if I was crying tears of joy. As if she loved me. As if we loved each other. I wept more and more. I put on an act, just like I did all those cards I wrote expressing appreciation and adoration, as if it was a duty. I was an emotional, messy jumble of never wanting to see her again, and desperately needing her to love me, the autopilot taking over, stuck on a moving sidewalk. When I was older and the boys at school were no longer interested in being friends, and the girls had distanced themselves, or worse, turned mean, she focused her teasing on my lack of a social life. Why aren't you more social? Do you just not have friends? She'd say. There was something in her that liquidated any confidence I had left. My system would malfunction, an invisible force pressing on my limbs. Less a freeze, more a flop. Scott was an assistant captain of his hockey team, which was the best in the league. He was handsome, a rolling jock of the halls. It's difficult to imagine he was not a bully at times, but he did grow up to be a very sensitive man. I have a lot of love for my brother. He bawled his eyes out after the premiere of my film, Freeheld. Ashley was pretty, smart, and feminine. The ideal popular 1990s girl. Scott and Ashley were social butterflies, always in and out, always on the phone, making this plan and that plan. When they were not home, I would answer the phone and write down messages for them. Ashley. Tom called at 4:15. Says give him a call back. Or Scott. Kelly called and says she will meet you at Nick's later. I'd leave the post-it notes stuck on the side of the island. They'd be waiting for them when they entered the kitchen. Yellow dance cards on display. Linda's subtext echoed louder than the calls, pounding her fist on the evidence, hammering in my loneliness. Why aren't you like them?